introduction.
Okay, got it. All right, I am on. So, as usual, I take advantage of my position right here to give you preview of coming attractions. Not to deter, this will be a wonderful presentation this evening, but things just get better and better. And in February, I believe it's the 21st, we have an evening with Richard Bangs. This may mean nothing to a bunch of you, but I would be hard pressed to name anybody in this world right now that could be called the principal explorer of our times. He's just, for the last 50 or so years, he's led a life of adventure that is just amazing. And apparently is a good speaker too. So he's going to come and tell us all about what he's been doing. Put it on your calendar. It's not to be missed. And I'll stake my reputation on that. So there. So I'm supposed to be the host that introduces. But nope, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to turn it over to somebody more qualified, and that is Hugh Hilliard. So I'm going to mute myself. And if Hugh will unmute yourself, please take over.
Yeah, thanks, Ed, and welcome, Doug. I'm so glad to see you after many years. I first came across Doug Woodward about 54 years ago, I figure, when I was a Boy Scout in the Atlanta area. And Doug moved down to the Atlanta area from Maryland, and he got involved with the Boy Scout troop where I was a Boy Scout. And together with some of the leaders of the Boy Scout troop, they formed an explorer post. Doug had already had an explorer post in Maryland. He formed one down in Georgia, and the focus was whitewater paddling. One of the other leaders was Payson Kennedy, who many of you would know as one of the co-founders of the Dan Hale Outdoor Center. So you really couldn't have a better group of leaders than we had with Doug and Payson and Claude Terry and some others. We did a lot of paddling on southeastern rivers, but Doug, having come from up in this area, said, well, we should, get up to the mid-Atlantic states some and paddle up there. And we went up to the Youghiogheny, the North Fork of the South Branch of the Potomac, the New River, the Gauley. We started doing races. And Doug also, as some people were discussing earlier, he had all the equipment and molds in his basement to build kayaks. And so pretty much each of the Boy Scouts and Explorer Post members built their own fiberglass kayak. We had some Old Town kayaks that we replaced with some really much better Freon and other models from Europe that performed a lot better. But going back before he came to Atlanta, Doug had roots up here, and I think he paddled with a lot of the CCA people up here. He'll probably talk more about that, but I think he paddled with people like John Sweet, Carter Hearn, Tom McEwen, Barbara Brown, and others, many of whom are still paddling with CCA. But Doug was a great leader.
Wow.
Great leader of our Explorer Post, and really helped many people to have a lifelong love for the outdoors and to start activities that they've stuck with for the rest of their lives. At least I have. Just one thing he did is he helped to lead a trip of our Explorer Post out west, where we had an old school bus, which he had to fix on numerous occasions, but we managed to get out there, and we paddled on the Arkansas River, the part of the Colorado, the Selway, and some other rivers. And that was, a memory of a lifetime doing that trip with Doug. And I lost touch with him for a long time until David Cottingham gave me this book a few years ago that I don't know if you can really see it, but it's a book that Doug wrote, I guess about, almost 20 years ago. No, maybe not that long, but a while ago, called Wherever Waters Flow. And it's if you haven't read it, it's a great story about many of Doug's adventures, all through the country and throughout the world. So I'm sure we'll hear more about those stories. And Doug's still very active. I hear he does biking virtually every day where he lives in North Carolina, and he went paddling last year on the Yampa River, I understand, and did hiking in Ireland. So there's no moss growing on that rock. So enough from me, but I'll turn it over to Doug.
Thank you so much, Hugh. I appreciate those words, and they bring back great memories of times both in Maryland and with you and the other scouts in Atlanta. So anyway, we'll move to the slideshow. Excuse me, I'm in the last stages of a cold. Hopefully it's the last. And I will comment on several old CCA members here. This is Jim Stewart, who now lives in Texas, and as I understand it, is a quite active paddler still. And I'd like to hold that slide for a moment and just say a few words about those times. There weren't many of us. And if you saw somebody with a canoe or kayak on top of their vehicle, why, usually you knew who it was and where they were headed. And the Potomac and its tributaries were my watershed then, as they are for many of you right now. And the Potomac was terrifically polluted. It was posted unsafe for swimming and also for eating any fish taken from its waters. And there were some stretches of the Potomac that had no biological population whatsoever. 18 dams were proposed in the basin. They were essentially make-work projects in Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. We wrestled with that problem and soon discovered that one of the most effective ways of having a positive impact was education. Over a period of several years, wet education was provided to Stuart Udall, William O. Douglas, and most of the delegations, the congressional delegations from Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. Experienced canoeists paddled them down the Potomac and its tributaries to see firsthand the problems and potential that existed there. Justice Douglas later stated, and I quote, "What is really needed is to clean up the Potomac, not dam it up." In the end, only 2 of the 18 proposed dams were built. And the paddler you're looking at now, Jim Stewart, was one of the people instrumental in fighting the dam proposals and convincing legislators that they were not needed. President Johnson signed the Water Quality Act of 1965 into law. And over the next 3 decades, the Potomac, with much additional legislation, affected a slow recovery. But let's move off of that slide and take a look at some other folks from that era that you may know. You're looking at Marion Hardy and Terry Franz. Marion was one of the top K1W competitors in the US and Canada too at that time. And I thought I would take a chance about 2 hours ago and see if her phone number was the same. And by golly, I got a hold of her. And she sounds as young as she did then. Very sharp. And I think she is with us on this Zoom presentation. But in any case, it was a delight to hear her voice. Joe Letterly, whom we lost not that long ago. Joe is in the grips of the first drop in Bull Sluice, but doing a good job of keeping control. Dan Sullivan, who shared many bits of wisdom with me. Rosemary Bridge, who was always there at a race. Chester Summit, in the days when PFDs were not mandatory, showing his open canoe skills at Bull Sluice. Jean Dunn, cohort of Dan Sullivan, and she was always there at races also, as well as being a paddler. Dick Bridge, who with his two sons, Charlie and John, literally saved my life on my first kayak run of the Yak, when I wrapped my kayak around a rock in the Dimples Rapid. And they worked as a team to get me off of there, get the kayak straightened. And it was a hair-raising moment, but Dick was there for many people. I'd like to pause here, looking at high water, which the Potomac might look like right now. Our rivers down here certainly look this way. And I'd like to read some words from the book that Hugh just showed you. It was an incident on October 7th, 1972, as the Potomac was surging and rising toward 10 feet, that suddenly catapulted the CCA into prominence as a vital force for river safety. A small group of advanced CCA boaters had enjoyed the high water at Difficult Run that morning and were taking out at Old Anglers Inn. 4 paddlers in 2 open canoes had just climbed into their boats at the same spot. It was obvious to the CCA group that the 4 were novices. The way paddles are held and used, and the paddler's position in the canoe, are usually dead giveaways. And they stopped to warn them of the danger of the river at its current level. "Thank you very much, but we'll be fine," was the gist of their reply. They departed downriver. The CCAers loaded their boats and started to head for home. It was at this point that Tom Yanowski, mulling the scenario over in his mind, decided that the probability of the 4 canoeists getting into trouble was so great that he should unload his boat and gear and try to catch up with them. Enough time had passed that he was unsure that he could be of help at this point, even if he did overtake them. Indeed, both canoes had capsized in the vicinity of Stubblefield Falls, 2 of the paddlers making it to shore, while the other pair clung to a rocky islet in mid-river that was rapidly disappearing in the rising waters. Help had been summoned, but the would-be rescuers were becoming increasingly frustrated with their failed attempts to get a rope to the stranded pair. The police had radioed for a helicopter. As Tom hove into sight and quickly evaluated the scene before him, both the predicament and its solution were evident. with the National Capital Park Police and the Glen Echo and Cabin John volunteer fire departments looking on, and the Channel 9 TV news cameras grinding away, he proceeded to eddy out at the tail of the islet, take one of the stranded pair aboard, ferry him to safety, and then return to rescue the other in the same manner. The police and fire department personnel were impressed. How is it that 4 paddlers could be at the mercy of the river, while another was in such complete control? To help answer that question, CCAer Bill Carr and Chairman John Seabury Thompson met at lunch with C&O Canal Superintendent David Ritchie. Ritchie was already a canoeist himself, and after the favorable publicity of Yanoski's recent rescue performance, was quite open to a working relationship with the canoe cruiser. The trio discussed river safety programs in which the CCA was already quite involved, improved put-ins and takeouts for paddlers, the resolution of post-hurricane, Agnes was the hurricane, problems on both the river and the canal, and the possibility of river rescue squads similar to the ski patrol. The paddling club had already been working for several years to establish a close relationship with park personnel through the CCA's Know Your River trips. But now there was a new respect for the skill and maturity of this local paddling association. That relationship did not extend to the running of Great Falls, however, which was generally considered certain suicide by park personnel, as well as most of the paddling community. John Barry had once listed in the CCA cruiser a tongue-in-cheek Great Falls trip on April Fool's Day, 1965. Little did he know then that only 10 years later, fellow CCAers Tom McEwen, Dan Schurenberger, and Wick Walker would make the first intentional descent of Great Falls. At dawn on a Sunday morning in August 1975, at a time when the park was quiet and deserted, they would do what couldn't be done. Others would follow. Thanks for looking at that same slide all the while that I read. I'll jump to the basement boat building workshop, which you heard about if you were here early. Danny Isbister was discussing it, and you, Hilliard, mentioned it. We're looking now at 2 of my Maryland scouts, Nancy Rayburn and Mimi Heyman, polishing up the mold, cutting the first layer out, putting a gel coat in the mold. And of course, using all safety precautions, we did not work with gloves or masks, which would have been rather advisable. Nancy popping the boat from the mold. Mimi working on the seat and cockpit ram as a separate entity. So I will say, those of you who know Mimi today know her as Mimi Demery. She and Dave started Demery Inflatable Boats, which has been very successful and is still an active entity today. The workers had to be fed. That's my oldest son, David, giving Nancy a Christmas cookie. And this is a look at some of the boats that have come out of those molds. We're looking now at some of the ones from my Atlanta Explorer post And even though there are a lot of solid colors, we did use dress materials, as I did in my boat there at the bottom of the picture. And often people in the fabric shop would wonder why in the world a teenager was coming in to check out different patterns of dress material. Hugh mentioned the old school bus that we traveled west in. This was the group from Maryland, and we were loaded with boats on top. The bus was given to us. It had to be taken out of service since it was 10 years old. A 1960 International. As Hugh said, it took many repairs to get it west and back again. But we did it. We ran the Colorado. And then it took on a new form with the Atlanta Scouts, which of course Hugh is associated with. And we had 13 kayaks and 2 rafts racked up on top. We were stopped in Durango for fear that by the police who feared that we would take out their overhead. But I assured them, even with the boats, we were only 12 feet high. On that trip, we ran the Selway and the Lochsa. And that brings us to another time. We're looking back a long while. The movie Deliverance was filmed in 1971, released in 1972. And as you may or may not know, it was based on an actual canoe trip taken by author James Dickey and his friends Lewis King and Al Brazelton. We see Dickey here. That trip took place on Georgia's Coosawattee River, which was about to be inundated by a lake formed behind a new dam that had just been built. Allow me to read one more passage from my book, which describes the real-life experience that spurred the film Deliverance. Lewis King, on whom Burt Reynolds' character in the film is based, later supplied what we came to regard as the facts of that river trip, now long faded into the mist of time. First, he had emphasized, you may think of the Southern Appalachians as being wilderness now, but in the 30s and 40s, that country was really wild. A man that was perceived as a threat to the mountain folks might just disappear permanently. Murder was always a viable option because few outsiders were going to go snooping around those forests looking for the missing man. It seemed that the canoeing that day was actually done by Dickey and Brazelton, while King went looking for a place downstream where he could meet the pair. Finding no road to the river, he parked and started down a path leading through the woods. Like yellow jacket sentries guarding their nests against danger, 2 armed men suddenly appeared and demanded to know his business. King's tale of a canoe on its way through the rapids of this river seemed absurd to the mountain men, and they thought it was far more likely that he was a revenue officer looking for their moonshine still. The older of the pair told the younger to take King to the river and stay with him, son. Words, along with their sinister undertone and unspoken meaning that King has never forgotten. Unsure of his armed companion's patience and almost overwhelmed by the thought that Dickie and Brazelton might already have passed that point, King waited and sweated and prayed. The canoeists had run into serious difficulties themselves in the rapids upstream, but finally hove into sight as daylight was beginning to dim. At that point, the demeanor of the mountain men changed completely. Shotguns disappeared, and there were smiles and kind words as they helped carry the canoe and gear up the hill to the truck. Three of us happened to be in the right place at the right time to get involved with Deliverance: Payson Kennedy, Claude Terry, and myself. Here we see John Voight getting his cuts and bruises applied. The same for Burt Reynolds. Ronnie Cox, who ends up being drowned in the river in the film story. Ned Beatty, who was my favorite of the four principals. Once during the filming, when he missed the bus back from Atlanta, I think they had had quite a bit in underground Atlanta. Why, the director asked me to fill in for Ned in a non-canoeing scene, in a driving scene in the early part of the film, and Ned came and sought me out and thanked me very kindly afterward. Here, Payson Kennedy is getting his hair shaded, and you can see some of the cuts and bruises applied. Claude Terry getting the same treatment, and yours truly getting worked on as well. Claude and Ralph Garrett on the right, who is a professional Hollywood stuntman, both doubled for John Voight. Ralph took the fall from the cliff. Only got paid $1,000 for it, which even in 1971, I think was pretty cheap. He had to push off a ledge about a third of the way down his fall to make sure he cleared rocks at river level. James Dickey was cast as the sheriff, though he's later thrown off the set for being too involved in the story. Herbert Cowboy Coward, who was found working as a gunslinger in the ghost town of Maggie Valley. And he's still living today, living there in Cullowhee, and one of the nicer fellows you'll ever meet. For those of you who know the Deliverance film, there's quite a contrast. Billy McKinney, and he was a tree surgeon in California, originally tried out for the part by Burt Reynolds, but he felt more appropriate as one of the bad guys. There were a lot of logistics and a lot of time spent just getting to the river and back. Most of the filming was done on the Chattooga, although some was done on the Tallulah River. Here they're arranging some of the junk to make the cabin scene look even junkier. And the first cabin they chose, they came back to set up the set and shoot. And the owner said, "You get away from here. I read the book while you were gone, and you're not filming that story on my place." So anyway, they did find one that worked. Here we see Reynolds lying in the canoe after his hip is broken. They're doing a lot of close-up filming as he writhes in agony. And then we see John Voight, director John Boorman. The pothole at Raven Rock Rapid. 18 of us once squeezed into that hole. And I was on the bottom. At that time, I didn't know there is an exit that you can actually crawl and swim through. You have to be underwater for a little bit, but you don't have to come back out the top of it. Here we see Voight and Beatty running Raven Rock Rapid. We did a lot of runs of this to show them how. They did this one and immediately capsized as soon as I took this picture. Deliverance was filmed in a dark mood. You notice life jackets or PFDs are always painted a dark color. Here, Vilmos Sigmund, the photography director, is darkening the rocks by splashing water on them. Here, he's waiting for a cloud to darken the mood a bit. And there was a lot of waiting around between filming where you could talk and cool off. Reynolds enjoying his lunch. And when we did our stunt work for Deliverance, why, we didn't have Reynolds in the canoe. We had his dummy, affectionately known as No Balls. A lot of our work was done in the Five Falls area. Some of the roughest was here in Corkscrew. Claude and I are paddling. Claude's doubling for Boyd. I'm doubling for Ned Beatty. And again, No Balls is taking the ride with us. And the film crew catches a few fun rides of their own, including Sock'em Dog. Now, a change of scenes. If you ever wonder how real moonshine stills are, this is one. You can see it's quite camouflaged. And it was stumbled upon by me and a friend and our kids taking a hike in the Stokoe Creek drainage, which is a small tributary of the Chattooga. And as we came up the creek and saw this, we froze for a long while, listening to see if we could hear the click of a rifle bolt. everything was in order as an operating still. There was even a donkey tied up for carrying the jugs out. And as you can tell, I finally got my camera out. But the next morning, I went up to the Wolverton Mountain grocery store. Well, it was a general store run by Harry and Coben Moore. And I asked Harry, I said, do you know who might be running shine between my place and Stokoa Creek? And Harry replied, might. And I said, well, if you see them, make sure they know it was hikers and not the feds that were coming through there still yesterday. He said, well, reckon they already know. Now we switch to another time. We'll fast forward a year and mention Jimmy Carter, who had a love for the outdoors and particularly for rivers. He had become familiar with the Chattahoochee, want to get to know your river time as governor, but he was not satisfied with that. He had been to the premiere of Deliverance. He knew that we were starting to do trips on the Chattooga and wanted to go. He was a conservationist from the get-go. When he became governor, preparation for the Spruce Bluff dam site on the Flint River was set to begin. And that would have provided many jobs in his home district of Southwest Georgia. But he asked for additional economic and environmental studies of the project. And after a careful review of the facts, he termed the project unnecessary and wasteful and used his executive power to deauthorize the dam, which of course infuriated a lot of people in the legislature. So let's take a look at those times. We knew at that time he was running for president. And if you can imagine anyone getting that close to a presidential candidate with an open knife, that was Margaret Tucker, one of our guides. Here she is running Chuck Parrish down Second Ledge in a canoe. This canoeing trip, we took Carter and a number of his staff from the Department of Natural Resources down Section 3 of the Chattooga. Here we see Carter and his son Jack watching Sam Pickering, one of his staff, explain how a knife is made. This is a shot that became rather famous, as it happened to be the last piece of film in my camera. I thought, there's no way they're going to run both sleuths. I'm going to get all my shots done before they get there. And I had one left and caught Carter at a moment of hesitation, but he quickly recovered. Claude is crossing over for a stroke on the right side to straighten things out. The first drop of bull sluice, and they made a very good run on it at a time when hardly anyone had run bull sluice tandem in an open. Here we see Carter on the section 2, the kayak trip. He's thanking his guides, Barbara Wamsley and Maggie Tucker. We taught him to roll in the Georgia State pool in Atlanta, and he did a good job. I would say that he had a 75 or 80% roll by the time he was out on the water. That was Big Shoals that he was running on section 2. Here, Roger Lozier is working with Jack Carter on rolling the river. And this shot is one where we took them down section 4 by raft, and the raft guide missed his line at 7 foot, dumped everybody into the water except Rosalind Carter, who stayed in the raft as it righted itself, and she put her paddle in, got that raft to shore along with several of the swimmers. Quite a lady. Now, the publicity from Deliverance drew a lot of people to the river, and a lot of people were out of control. There were 19 deaths on the Chattooga in a 2-year period after the film came out. Personally, we began to, in my marriage with, we began to take
her PowerPoint slides will be coming out soon.
we began to take our children at a young age on trips of a week to 10 days. And they just grew up that way. And now, why? As adults, why? Kenyon, who's helping me here tonight with a Zoom, you see guiding on the Salmon River. Sun Forest in the Grand Canyon. And that brings us to the end. I'll give you a closer look at the book that Hugh was showing you before the presentation began. And if anyone would like an autographed copy, you can go to headwaterspublishing.com, which you see at the bottom of the screen, and pick one up there. I'm not really pushing them, but if you would like one, I'd be delighted. And there was a later book I did, which has been popular too. If you have young children or grandchildren that you would like to adventure with, or your next generation would like to adventure with, without waiting until they're older, why, this might be the book for you. Anyway, I thank you all for bearing with me on this evening's program, and we'll turn it back.
Thank you, Doug. That was a delight. I'm sure people have questions. The most orderly way to do it is through the chat, and I can read those. But if there's enough silence, you can also try to do it verbally.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Dale,
Great.
do you have a question?
That was great presentation.
Well, thank you. It's ancient history, but sometimes it's fun to look back.
But it's real history and you made it happen.
Well, I was a small part of it.
Give yourself more credit.
Well, I think I meant to give some credit to Jimmy Carter, who added 25 wild and scenic rivers to the system while he was president. So I will slip that in there.
I have a question here. Doug, what were your favorite streams to paddle in the East?
Oh, the Chattooga certainly became, or do you mean not the South, but farther north?
Oh, go for
it. Yeah, I fell in love with the Chattooga as one of my book chapters starts off. You don't even know she's a river at first, the way I describe things. But anyway, the Chattooga was certainly a favorite, and I think we got a little, running trips through southeastern expeditions, which Claude and I had started. We got a little jaded, perhaps, because we saw the river at all river levels, and we thought, okay, we know it, but we didn't. And I think we woke up later when we lost some friends.
Well, we have a comment here. I understand the Chattooga Conservancy is pushing Georgia Power to remove the dam on Tougaloo Lake. Are you involved in that? And your thoughts on how successful that effort might be?
I have looked at that and made one set of comments on it. I'm not sure how successful it can be, but it should be one of the dams to go. And along with the four dams on the Snake River in the west, those are dams which are.
Can you not talk your name? No, you know, what you said, Vicky and Jay and Vicky.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question here. How could those open boats run class 3 and 4 rapids without flotation?
Yeah. Well, flotation gradually came along, as you know. Styrofoam blocks first, and then finally float back or inflatable bags.
Well, we didn't know any better. We thought we were at the top of technology then. Now, here's a statement. Well, it's a question too. Burt Reynolds said he was foolish and did one of his own stunts on Deliverance, running some rapid himself when he should have had his stunt double do it. It didn't go well, and he said he suffered permanent damage to his back. Do you recall this?
I do. You see that in the film when he takes it's into the gorge and he slides over a drop and takes quite a bumping down the falls. I don't think I would have even considered doing that bodily. And of course, Reynolds is gone now. Beatty is gone. We're left with John Boyd and Ronnie Cox.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions right here. There's a thank you from the Georgia Kayak Association. So we obviously have people from far and wide joining us, and we really appreciate that and hope you'll continue to do that. Here's another question or statement. You started a paddle business with the leftover canoes from Deliverance. That's all it says right there.
Well, there were a couple leftover rafts, one of which was a monster that began taking water internally, and it was almost impossible to handle. And eventually we got away from those rafts, but that did start the business.
Well, you certainly started something.
And actually the leftover canoes were given to Raven Gap, the Coochie School, right near the Georgia-North Carolina border. And they, as far as I know, they used them in their outdoor program.
How many did you destroy?
I don't know that any were completely destroyed, but some were pretty distorted. But they had a good man at Raven Gap, Des Oliver, who could hammer them back into shape, put patches on them, and
Wow.
That's all it took.
Oh, very interesting. I've enjoyed it, Doug, and I don't know, what do you want to say? Not friend of history, fan of history. I like history, and I'm very happy to learn more about the history of paddling that I've been involved in for the past 40 or so years.
well, this gets you back even a little farther than that.
Little farther than that. That's true. I never did build my own boat.
Well, thanks.
Well, okay. Gee, this is great. I noticed you left out the rhinoceros slide. You must have been anticipating more family audience.
Yeah, I got a hint on that one that I was not up to date on that kind of a joke.
Oh, I see. We another little question came in. So, Doug, did you ever, in the filming of the movie, feel that you were in danger, or what was your greatest rapid?
I would say when I was moving no balls and the canoe down to a new location through Jawbone Rapid. Those of you familiar with it know there's an eddy on river left at the top, which you can make and then peel out of to run the bigger drop. And as I was doing this with no balls and a bunch of loose rope in the canoe, I leaned real hard as I drew on the paddle and it snapped in half.
Oh.
And I just plunged head first with the rope, no balls, and the canoe all on top. And I was in this tangle of rope.
Oh, no.
I came out of Jawbone okay, but I was heading for Sock of Dog, which is not that far away.
Oh.
And Claude made a very timely save that got out to pull the whole jumble in. but it was a good lesson in never taking to your craft with loose rope in it.
I'm glad it turned out okay. So,
Me too.
well, last call for questions. Well, Doug, I really appreciate this. People, you don't realize how hard it is to tag this guy. I mean, his agenda makes my head spin. I feel like a real stay-at-home, and so trying to find some time in his schedule, I didn't think I would do it, and I've been trying to get him for a couple of years. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as me. So unfortunately, with Zoom, you can't hear applause. About all you can do is look at chat. But I'm sure that there's some appreciative people here. So be careful going home if you are going home tonight. I think Doug had to afford a stream to get to his venue for broadcasting. So we're very glad just to see him show up. So
Well, I thank you all for being here, feeling that this was something worth listening to, and I hope I haven't bored you too much. So,
no.
No, it was fascinating.
Yes.
well, thank you, Susan.
Well, folks, I hope I'll see you all again next month and for future shows too. I'll turn it back over to Susan to turn off the recording and say goodnight to everybody. So
Thank you,
Yes.
Doug.
Ed, and thank you for organizing all these. You've been great doing it. So let's
Thank
give Ed a
Thank you.
applause too. He pulls these things together, and Zoom meetings aren't great, but they allow us to get people like Doug and some of the other people that Ed has brought in the last year. It's just been fabulous. The speakers he's had come in. So thank you so much, Ed and Doug. So.
and we didn't have to go out tonight in the rain to see this.
I know.
Well, I'm
All right.
glad none of us have lost electricity tonight. Or maybe some have, but they aren't here.
Yeah.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Ed. It was a great presentation.
Yes, thank you, Hugh.
Thank
you,
you
Doug.
very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Doug.
Thanks.